Morning, everybody. I'm Storm Mushry, Conservation Education Manager with the New Mexico Department of Game and Fish. And today for our video or our recording, we've got Erin. She's going to be our avian, our non-game avian biologist for the Department of Game and Fish. And she's going to be giving us a really cool, informative presentation on, I believe it's going to be some survey methodologies and techniques for birds. And with that, I'm going to turn the presentation over to Erin.
My name is Erin DeVivier. I'm the non-game avian biologist for the department. And as Storm said, I'll be giving a presentation today on bird surveys and monitoring in New Mexico. So New Mexico has diverse habitats across the state and diverse avian species associated with these habitats. The New Mexico Ornithological Society keeps track of verified species across the state, and there's 549 verified species in New Mexico. This includes 5 introduced species that are established and 3 extirpated species. There are resident species in New Mexico, which are birds that live here year-round, as well as migratory species that are present only during a specific portion of the year, such as breeding season, the non-breeding season, or maybe just here during migration on their way through to somewhere else. The department's State Wildlife Action Plan in 2016 identified 72 species of greatest conservation need in the state. These are also referred to as SGCNs, and that's the main focus of my job. The New Mexico Bird Program also includes my supervisor, Mason Klein, who is the waterfowl biologist as well as the bird program manager, the lesser prairie chicken biologist, Grant Beaupre, and the resident game bird biologist, Casey Cardinal. Also, there are 6 federally listed species in New Mexico: the Aplomado falcon, piping plover, Mexican spotted owl, Southwestern willow flycatcher, yellow-billed cuckoo, and whooping crane. So accurate species identification by both sight and sound is a necessity for bird surveys. You can use field guides, apps on your phone, and other resources that are listed here to gain familiarity with species plumage, behavior, range, habitat preferences, and vocalizations. And then there's some equipment on the left side of the screen. So for almost any bird survey, you're going to need to use binoculars, and in some cases, it's good to have a spotting scope. A kestrel, which is the red device on the top row, is used to determine the wind speed and temperature. This can be really important for bird surveys because the time of day, temperature, and wind speed can have a significant impact on detectability, both for bird behavior and your ability as the observer to detect them. The rangefinder is below that kestrel device and is used to determine the distance between the observer and the detected species. You'll also use a GPS or a smartphone or tablet in combination with a notebook to record your location data and observations. In the center, there's also a Fox Pro. This is a device that's used to broadcast calls. So you'll play the target species call that you're looking for, and in some cases, this can increase detectability. So for all surveys and monitoring, the research questions must be clearly identified, and survey design is key. Some of the considerations that you need to take into account are to evaluate the species biology, the appropriate sample unit or location that you're interested in, methods, and the options for analyses. There are basic assumptions that need to be met in order to obtain unbiased estimates. There are protocols for occupancy, abundance, density, species composition, target species, clearance surveys, effects of treatment or habitat improvement projects, and population trend monitoring, as well as other options. If you include distance sampling, which I mentioned with the rangefinder on the last slide, these methods allow for density estimates, so you can compare the number of birds per unit area with another location. This also allows you to correct estimates for imperfect detection. So on this slide, I have 2 general examples of avian surveys. Point counts on the right side are when the observer is stationary. You have a set time, which can vary by the species, which allows more time to identify or detect cryptic or shy species within the area. These point counts can have either a fixed radius or an unlimited distance. So depending on what survey protocol you're using, you might only look and listen for birds within 100 meters, in which case you wouldn't count any birds outside that, or you might just count or see anything that you see or hear. For line transects, the observer is mobile, so you can cover more area quickly. This allows for species that flush to be detected more readily. And an example of this would be a non-breeding season survey of grassland birds, where they may not be singing. Survey methods can be used in combination with broadcast calls, as I mentioned, to increase detectability. Basically, you're trying to elicit a territorial response in order to increase detectability of the bird. And a few more general considerations for surveys: federal or state permits may be required. You need to make use of standardized methods if possible, because data collection must be repeatable. You should be familiar with the survey location and scout in advance. This is especially important during nocturnal surveys or surveys that start before dawn when you're walking around in the dark. You need to focus on the survey and avoid double counting. You have to be paying attention because you might just have one chance to see or hear a bird, and you need to be able to be focused enough to make that detection count. The survey shouldn't be completed during inclement weather, such as precipitation or high winds that inhibit detection, and you need to be sure to record all data accurately and completely. So one example of a point count is the North American Breeding Bird Survey. This is a fixed distance survey, so all birds seen or heard within a quarter mile are recorded. The BBS is completed by biologists and volunteers with excellent birding skills. This is a tri-national effort. You can see on the map that there's over 4,500 routes from Canada down into Mexico. Not all routes are surveyed every year, but these are roadside surveys using the point count method that are timed to coincide with the peak breeding season for the location. So surveys in New Mexico would occur earlier in the year than a survey up in Montana. Each survey route includes 50 3-minute point counts along a 24.5 mile long route spaced at half-mile intervals. The surveys start half an hour before sunrise and take about 5 hours to complete. So since this is such a long-term data set, researchers were able to use it to look at population trends across the continent. Recently, they reported widespread decline of breeding birds across North America, including loss of common and widespread species. You can see on the graph, the species in red are species that declined, the species in blue are species that increased since 1970. So 3.2 billion birds were lost across 38 families, and 29 families increased for a gain of 250 million birds. This is a net loss of 2.9 billion birds since 1970. So for threatened and endangered species, survey experience, a Fish and Wildlife Service training course, and a Section 10 permit are required in order to conduct surveys. All three of these examples are targeted point counts that make use of broadcast and are timed to coincide with peak breeding season activity, which is also referred to as a survey window. The species biology affects the survey timing, the point count spacing distance, and the amount of time spent per point. So many owls and raptors initiate breeding earlier in the year than other birds. Mexican spotted owl territories can be from about 900 to 4,000 acres. So because of this timing and size of territories, these surveys occur from March through August and are spaced at quarter to half mile intervals. And you spend a long time at each point. So you'll spend a total of 15 minutes. The first 10 minutes are spent playing the call and listening, and then the last 5 minutes are only to listen for spotted owls in the area. If you hear a spotted owl or a predator in the area, the broadcast call ceases. You don't want to harass the owl and you don't want to draw predators in. If you suspect breeding, You can do a follow-up visit in the daytime. You can see in the photo in the center, the chick that's hiding behind the adult in the rocks. For Southwestern Willow Flycatcher, these are more typical pasture and breeding season species, and they have small territories, about 2 acres. So these surveys occur from mid-May to mid-July, starting at sunrise, and they're spaced at 20 to 30 meter intervals throughout suitable habitat. There's a pre-broadcast listening period, a 10 to 15 second broadcast, and then a 1 minute listening period. The primary song of the flycatcher is also referred to as a Fitzbue, and it can be used to detect flycatchers. I'll play the sound. So as you can see from this video, it's not super easy to see the bird. The lighting's poor, but hearing that Fitzbue sound is confirmation that this is a willow flycatcher. So once again, just really important to be able to identify every species by sound and by sight. The yellow-billed cuckoo is a late season migrant, so it doesn't get into New Mexico until June. Surveys occur between mid-June and mid-August, and these have territories that range in size from about 10 to 100 acres. So this spacing is a little more spaced out than the flycatcher. These are 100-meter intervals with a pre-broadcast listening period, 5 broadcast calls spaced at 1, and 5 broadcast calls which are spaced at 1 minute intervals. This is a photo of a Gould's wild turkey roost. This species is state threatened in New Mexico. Turkeys roost in trees at night for protection from ground predators, and some sites are used throughout the year. Turkeys often start vocalizing before sunrise in the roost, and the timing that they leave the roost can vary, so it's important to arrive before sunrise. Winter and spring roost surveys, in combination with data from GPS backpack locations, are used to estimate the minimum population size. There are 2 types of quail surveys in New Mexico. Spring surveys are used to monitor population trends and estimate densities of northern bobwhite and scaled quail populations in the eastern part of the state in mid-May through early June. This is timed for breeding season vocalizations. The surveys start 15 minutes before sunrise and occur along a 15 to 20 mile roadside route with 3-minute point counts at 1 mile intervals. The observer records all quail calls or detections, as well as the distance and direction to each individual. Quail are also recorded if they're detected between stops. The fall surveys occur in September and can be completed during the morning starting at sunrise or in the afternoon starting about 2 hours before sunset. The route should be completed in a way to avoid looking directly into the sun in order to increase chances for detectability. These are 10 to 30 miles long, driven at 15 miles per hour, and also include distance sampling. You record the distance and the direction to the quail seen and heard, count the group size, and record the age, sex, and age of the chicks by size if possible. You can also complete occupancy surveys where you aren't actually seeing the species. In this case, we're looking for dusky grouse and hiking transects through suitable habitat and looking for pellets or sign that the individuals are in the area. This project is within a habitat treatment area and as well as areas with proposed treatments. So they're just looking to see if dusky grouse are in the area. This is a photo of a lesser prairie chicken lek, which is a gathering for courtship displays. These birds are sexually dimorphic. You can see in the center, the female has cryptic plumage. The males are displaying. You can see their bright eye combs and air sacs. The vocalizations that the males make during displays is referred to as booming and can be heard up to about a mile away from a lek. For this reason, the wind speed is very important during these counts to ensure that it's possible to detect any lek, because you might only very faintly hear the sound in the distance. Lek counts and roadside routes are used as an index of abundance to monitor lek attendance and population trends. These surveys start 30 minutes before sunrise and the point counts are for 5 minutes, spaced at 1 mile intervals. If detected, you record the compass direction, estimated distance, and the number of chickens visible if you can actually see the lek. On the department's prairie chicken areas, we also complete flush counts to determine the number of birds and the sex ratio. Aerial surveys using helicopters and fixed-wing aircraft are also used for avian surveys. You can use them during lek counts to visually count birds or use infrared imagery. And then in the photo on the left, the Midwinter Waterfowl Survey is a long-term nationwide effort to survey wintering waterfowl in concentrated areas since 1955. It provides data on population trends and is used to inform management and harvest strategies. The photo is of about 3,500 dark geese, which are both Canada and cackling geese near the Tucumcari Airport. In the photo on the top right, this is a telemetry flight for marked birds. You can see the antenna that's strapped to the wing of the aircraft. And below, nests of golden eagles can be difficult to monitor from the ground just because of their location on a cliff face. So sometimes aerial surveys are used for nest searching as well. In this photo, you can see that there are fresh green branches in the nest bowl, which indicates that there's been recent activity at the site. Territory occupancy and nest monitoring should occur according to protocols in order to limit disturbance and avoid impacts to nest success. There are known incubation periods of individual species, and that's used to determine the timing of when to check a nest for hatch or failure. In the top left, a long-billed curlew nest bowl was found during a capture effort. In the photo to the center, you can see a nest bowl that has broken eggshells inside and 2 dead curlew chicks laying just outside the nest bowl. It is sometimes possible to determine the predator based on scat or whitewash tracks, crushed, and the status of the eggshells, whether they're punctured, crushed, or missing. In the photo on the top right, this is an active burrowing owl site. Burrowing owls make use of prairie dog burrows, but there are signs of burrowing owl occupancy. You can see debris and signs of renovation by the owl, and there are also prey feathers and pellets. The bottom 3 photos are of ferruginous hawk nests. Ferruginous hawks build multiple nests within a territory, and you can determine occupancy by checking all the known nests and watching for ferruginous hawk presence. You can also then return after the chicks are hatched to determine success and the number of chicks. So captures and marking, as with surveys, research questions and study design are key. A United States Geological Survey permit from the Bird Banding Laboratory is required for capture and banding of migratory birds. There are some different rules for resident game bird species. And there are also additional considerations when you're marking birds. The bands, transmitters, and any attachment materials must be less than 3% of the species' body mass. So when you're putting a transmitter on a small bird, such as a warbler that only weighs 5 or 6 grams, it's important to make sure that you have the right equipment of the right size to make sure you're not impacting the survival of the species. Another consideration is the transmitter life. So for some species, you can set the transmitters to turn on and off in order to increase the longevity of the tag. And also when birds are captured, you also typically collect morphometrics data, such as the mass, the wing chord, the tail length, the tarsus length, and other measurements. So as with surveys, there are also collaborative standardized long-term data sets, which include monitoring across the full annual cycle. This includes the Institute for Bird Populations Monitoring Avian Populations and Survivalship Project, which is a continent-wide summer banding effort, as well as the sister program, which is overwintering survival in Latin America. In this photo, you can see several ruby-crowned kinglets in a fine mesh mist net that's stretched between 2 poles. When you're running mist nets, you need to check nets frequently so that the birds don't get super tangled. And you also need to very carefully extract the birds. Each bird is banded and data is collected on the age, sex, body condition, molt status, and reproductive status. And this information can be used to estimate vital rates such as survival, productivity, and recruitment. Encounters with recaptured individuals can also be used for data on survival, reproductive rates, and movement patterns. So this slide also has additional examples of captures and marking. In the top left, as well as the second photo on the bottom row, this is a Virginia's warbler. You can see the metal USGS band, as well as two plastic white color bands. These can be used for individual identification and territory mapping. On the left and the bottom, you can see a long-billed curlew. This bird is in the middle of receiving a GPS transmitter backpack. The paper that's held to the side there is just so we're not getting super glue on the feathers. And these tags are used to determine the migration timing and non-breeding season locations, as well as providing an individual identification. The sandtail crane in the center at the top has an alphanumeric tarsal band that's attached with rivets and includes a transmitter, which also allows for individual ID and movement data. The pintail in the top center has a solar paneled transmitter backpack that's being attached, and this allows for full annual cycle monitoring. In the bottom row, the mourning dove. For the mourning dove, the New Mexico Department of Game and Fish completes pre-season banding annually for harvest data, survival, and other information. The two photos on the right, these are examples of some trapping efforts. So the photo on the top is a baited walk-in trap for turkeys, and on the bottom, a baited swim-in trap for waterfowl. As you can see in the last slide, mist nets are also used. And in the case of the Virginia's warbler in these slides, this was called targeted mist netting because we used broadcast calls set adjacent to the mist nets in order to elicit the territorial response and bring the breeding males into the mist net. You can also use rocket nets for birds, such as the sandhill crane and other waterfowl species. So this is kind of a complete example of a project that's occurring in New Mexico. New Mexico is at the southernmost extent of the long-billed curlew's breeding range, and this is part of a larger migratory connectivity project. We started data collection in New Mexico in 2019 because there is what we refer to as a critical data gap. We don't know at that time where curlews that breed in New Mexico spend the rest of their year. Curlews are in New Mexico from about March to July or August, so most of their year is spent outside of the state. So in order to determine these non-breeding season locations, we started an effort to monitor and tag curlews. We located active territories with paired birds. So we were looking for curlews and then looking for courtship behavior, such as the second photo from the top, which is a male curlew, that's the smaller individual towards the back, that's doing a courtship display called feather stroking of the female, which is the larger bird. So once you see courtship behavior in an area, these birds are starting to establish their territories. And once incubation of eggs starts to occur, you'll need to watch for an incubation switch. So males incubate the nest at night and females incubate during the day. An incubation switch occurs in the morning and then again close to sunset. You'll basically see a curlew stand up from the nest site and the other paired bird will move in, sit down on the nest, and then basically just disappear in the grass. So you need to very carefully mark that location in your mind for where the nest site is because the bird might not be visible when it's actually sitting on the nest. And then in the photo on the top left, you can see there's a spotter that's set up with a spotting scope that is directing the capture crew to the nest location. So the two people that are further away have a mist net that's stretched out between them and they're walking towards the curlew net. Once they get to the net, they'll lower the net over the nest and then capture the bird from the nest site. The bird is then removed for processing within view of the nest, and that's when it receives the transmitter, leg flag, and morphometric data collection. And then the bird is released from the processing site, And then as you can see in the map to the right, we received the first data back in 2019 on migration timing and routes from curlews that breed in New Mexico. You can see the migration routes with the points that are scattered along the way from the Watros location in New Mexico all the way down to their non-breeding season locations in Mexico at the mouth of the Colorado River Delta and along the western coast. So this was a quick overview of bird survey and monitoring efforts in New Mexico. Thank you very much and happy birding.
Thank you, Erin. I enjoyed your presentation. I thought you gave a lot of great information, and I just want to thank you because I know you all are very busy. If you're not in the field, you're crunching numbers and trying to get your questions answered. And it's one of those that I know the folks are going to appreciate this very much. And before I let you leave today, I've got one question for you today, Erin. So it's one of those that I know, to be able, if somebody wants a job like yours, they're going to have, their degree in hand. And if you wouldn't mind just letting us know what your degree is, but if you can kind of think back, like if you were in mid school, starting into high school, or even in high school, if there were classes that you took that helped you out the most as you transitioned into your college career, so you could, be able to get that degree in hand. So.
Sure thing. Thanks, Storm. So I have a bachelor's degree in environmental biology, and then I spent a lot of years just traveling all over the country doing bird surveys in various locations. So that's kind of my background before starting this position back in 2018. Some of the middle school and high school courses that I think are really important. I mean, obviously biology, just getting those foundations of experimental design and learning about species biology is really important. But I would also say that don't overlook the importance of those English classes. Being able to effectively communicate, especially in written form, is super important for these jobs. So just make sure that you're paying attention in those classes as well and get that skill set.
Thank you, Erin. I appreciate it. And with that, I hope you all enjoyed the recording, and we'll see you at the next one. You all have a beautiful day. Thank you.